Hence, free will is conclusively an illusion. The meat industry is still morally bankrupt. Hence, free will is conclusively an illusion. The meat industry is still morally bankrupt. Hence, free will is conclusively an illusion. The meat industry is still morally bankrupt.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Islamic Defense Podcast. The other day I actually saw a video from sorry, just gonna get cut. The other day I saw a video from Cosmicskeptic, which made me think about this topic. So I figured, you know what, maybe I should make a response to this. So here we go. I'm coming from a Sunni Muslim Orthodox background, so my position is compatibilism. I actually watched a video from One Path Network where a sheikh basically explained this, and his explanation was pretty brilliant.
So, Sheikh, to start, I'd like to ask you the question, just to help our viewers understand. From an Islamic standpoint, what's our understanding of free will?
Well, in actuality, selective choice is about veering towards something. It's about inclining towards something. And after we incline to that particular thing, that particular choice that we incline towards is created for us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, God makes us the recipient of our choices.
Yes, it's true that everything we do does not happen without the will of Allah. They are being caused by Allah, right? Every single thing we do, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls everything. For example, let's say I'm moving my hand, right? Am I really moving my hand? If it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, would I be able to move my hand? No, I wouldn't be able to do anything. So He's the one who's sending the brain signals and the blood vessels. He's controlling every single cell of our body, every single atom of our body. So it's literally impossible for us to do anything without Him, which is why we say that nothing happens without the will of Allah. And this is part of the qadr of Allah. So we know that everything is controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then the question is asked, like, how are we free? Because we know that we're also free. Yes, it's true that every single thing we do is being controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing those things, He takes our wants into consideration, which means basically is that when we do something, when we want to do something, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes that thing to happen as we want them. Now, this has to be within our own control or within our own domain. And this is how every single thing we do, we're responsible for them. For example, let's say that I'm moving my hand. Now, when I'm moving my hand, obviously, I'm not doing that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing it. However, at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowing us to make the decision. And that's the thing. And this is how every single thing that happens because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows it to happen or causes it to happen. We don't do anything, but we decide what happens. And this is how both free will and determinism exist side by side. Now, let's get into and let's see what Cosmicskeptic has to say in regards to this.
Here is my case against free will. Now, the first issue that we have to face is, of course, the definition of free will. And since when I'm debating this, I'm the one who's denying the existence of something that someone else believes in, it really needs to be that someone else's definition that I'm using, which is why a video like this can be quite tricky. Now, this doesn't absolve me of any burden of proof. Unlike my passive atheism, I make the active claim that I think free will does not exist. But I can only do this once I'm sure that we all mean the same thing by free will. So, for ease's sake, I'll go with the most succinct and least controversial definition that I've been able to come up with, which is this. Free will is the ability to have acted differently. And what I mean by this is that if we were to wind back the clock in any situation, it was completely within the realm of possibility for you to have acted differently to the way that you actually did. For instance, it would have been completely possible for me to have said bonjour at the beginning of this video instead of good morning, and the choice to say the latter was completely within my control. The idea is that you are in control of your actions, and any decisions that you make are determined only by your own conscious self.
Okay, now this is the first problem that he makes. His definition of free will is actually kind of problematic, and I'm going to explain why. Having the ability to act differently, is it something that's even possible? The answer is no. You can't act differently because you only do what you do. For example, let's say I want to get a glass of water, and I do that, and I drink a glass of water. Could you have acted differently? No, you only acted the way you acted. You don't act differently. It's just something you think about. So free will is not that you can act differently. That's not what free will is. You cannot act differently. You only act the way you act. So how can you say that you can act differently when you never acted that way? It doesn't make any sense. So this is not a very good definition of what free will is. So this is my definition of what free will is. Free will is you deciding to do something and a deterministic process making that a reality. That's what free will is. For example, let's say that I want to drink a glass of water, and a deterministic process lets me get a glass of water. Now, if this deterministic process did not let me have that, then I was not free. But since it allowed that to happen, I was free. That I freely drank the glass of water. So this is the proper, I think, definition of what free will is. But yeah, let's take a look at his main argument against free will.
Again, consider this most simple of choices, chocolate or vanilla. Or, if it's easier, consider the last mundane choice that you had to make. Walk or drive this morning, go out or stay in tonight. Think about why you chose one or would choose one over the other. So what would make me choose vanilla over chocolate? Well, there is only one possible answer, which I'll elaborate on shortly. I would need to want it more than chocolate. In order to choose vanilla, I'd need to want vanilla. But is this something I can control? Can I control what it is that I want? Not a chance. Consider the fact that you, presumably, don't want to punch your mother in the face. Can you choose to want to do that? This isn't the same thing as choosing to do it. Could you choose to want to? No, no more than I could choose to want vanilla over chocolate. I just want chocolate more than vanilla. That's just a fact about myself that I can't change. But okay, let's go further, you say. Of course, I can't choose to want vanilla over chocolate when I really want chocolate, but what if I just decided, in the full knowledge that I would prefer chocolate, to go for vanilla anyway, just for the sake of regaining my free will and nothing else? Well, I'm afraid you'd still face the same problem. The exact same problem, in fact. In order to do that, you'd need to want to regain your free will as you see it. Why is your desire to prove a point like this stronger than the desire to have the ice cream you prefer? It just is. And if it happened not to be, you'd have chosen the ice cream that you do prefer. The key takeaway is this: you cannot determine your wants.
Okay, here Alex is committing the non sequitur fallacy. So what is the non sequitur fallacy? The non sequitur fallacy is a fallacy when you make an argument and in your argument your conclusion does not follow from the premises. For example, Alex's premise is that you cannot want your want, and his conclusion is therefore free will doesn't exist. But the problem here is that just because you don't want your want does not mean that free will doesn't exist. You see, it doesn't matter whether you want something or not. That has nothing to do with free will. Free will is you deciding to do something, and the deterministic process making that a reality. The idea that free will doesn't exist is kind of absurd. Let me give you guys an analogy. Imagine, in Bangladesh, we have this problem of some scoundrels peeing in the street, right? It does happen. Just bear with me. So let's say some guy is peeing in the street. And you see this guy and you go to him and you say to him, "Hey man, that's not cool." And that guy says, "Yeah, I decided to pee in the street, but I couldn't control my want as to why I wanted to pee in the street. Since I cannot control that, therefore I wasn't free. Therefore you can't blame me for this. I didn't freely choose to pee in the street. It wasn't my fault." That's absurd. Because you still decided that you want to pee in the street. Just because you couldn't control the reason you wanted to do that does not mean that free will doesn't exist. This is what I see a lot of critics of free will make, but it's not a sound argument. As a matter of fact, even if I go by the definition that is set up by Alex himself, it still doesn't make sense. Because what did he say? He said that free will is having the ability to act differently. So if this is true, that you have the ability to act differently, then that has nothing to do with the fact that you cannot want your want. I mean, you still have the ability to act differently. It doesn't follow. The conclusion doesn't follow from the premises. I'm sorry, it's a very bad argument. Now, I know Alex was very young, or more like a baby Alex, when he made this video, but this is not a good argument at all. Because it does not follow that just because you can't want your want, therefore free will doesn't exist. If you decided to pee in the street, then you have to be responsible for that. If you didn't decide to do that, then you have to be responsible for that. So, and that's it. And that's free will. So yeah, this is not a good argument. This is not a sound argument. So yeah, let's continue.
Now, that's one piece of the puzzle, and it may seem odd to leave it there, but just wait until we put them together. Okay, the next piece of the puzzle is to convince you of this fact, that there are only two reasons, none more in any circumstances, for which you will ever do anything. In fact, it's impossible for you to ever do anything for any reason other than one of these two. And those two reasons are because you want to or because you're forced to. And this is fundamentally important and worth really understanding and thinking about. You will only ever do anything in your entire life because you either want to or are forced to. That's it. No exceptions. So now, as promised, let's start putting this together. There are two reasons you will ever do anything, because you want to or because you're forced to. Of course, if you're forced to do something, then you're definitely not acting freely, and nobody would deny that. So that just leaves your wants. But, well, we've already concluded that you can't control your wants, so actions motivated by wants aren't really free either. So being forced to do something isn't free will, and wanting to do something isn't free will. But being forced or wanting to do something are the only reasons why you do anything. Hence, free will is conclusively an illusion.
Okay, so here Alex says that the only reason you do anything is because of two things. One, either you're forced to do it, or two, you wanted to do it. Now, if you're forced to do it, then that's not free will. But I disagree. You see, you could be forced to do something that you still wanted to do. For example, let's say that in most countries, murder is illegal, right? You cannot murder someone. Now, the thing is that I don't want to murder someone. So here, what is happening here, I'm both forced to not do something that I also want. So the thing is that just because you're forced to do something doesn't mean that it's against your free will.
But for the sake of argument, let me simply grant that there is some relevant difference between internally and externally determined actions, for whatever reason. Let me simply grant that free will is just the ability to act in accordance with internal causes and without external constraint. Okay, even then, I think compatibilism fails, and let me tell you why. Remember, compatibilism assumes that determinism is true. Right? It's an affirmation of the compatibility between determinism and free will. If determinism is true, then everything that happens in the universe is the result of some previous chain of causation dating back to the beginning of time. Right? Every thought in your brain is determined by something prior to it, as is whatever determined that, as is whatever determined that, and so on and so on. So now let's consider the supposed difference between an external cause of action and an internal cause of action, that distinction which compatibilism relies upon. So the compatibilist thinks that if, say, a boulder were to roll over and knock me off a cliff, I didn't freely choose to fall off that cliff because the cause of my doing so was external to me. But if I jump off that cliff, then I did act freely because the cause of me falling off the cliff was internal to me. Okay, well now consider the following. Let's say that I'm just walking along a road and a boulder rolls out in front of me, and not wanting to be crushed by it, I jump out of the way. According to the compatibilist, did I freely choose to jump? Well, kind of. I mean, I did jump because I wanted to jump. I wanted to avoid being crushed, and that desire is entirely internal. But who wouldn't want to avoid being crushed? I mean, sure, I wanted to jump, but the cause of that want was the boulder, something external. So although the immediate cause of me jumping was internal, ultimately the cause of my action was external. So I think it's fair to say that I was compelled to jump out of the way by something external to me, the boulder, and therefore didn't act freely. But
Here, Alex is committing the non sequitur fallacy. Just because your decision to jump out of the way was caused by external factors does not mean that free will doesn't exist, or that it had nothing to do with you jumping. Now, if this was the case, that you saw the boulder coming and for some reason you couldn't move your body, then you could argue that, okay, free will didn't have anything to do with this. But when you decided to jump out of the way, you still wanted to jump out of the way. You still decided to jump out of the way. That was your action. Okay? So how can you argue that your decision to jump out of the way is not free will, or it doesn't exist somehow? And again, the thing about murder, right? No one wants to murder someone, but we're still forced to not murder someone, right? Because we have laws. So in this case, we're both forced to do something that we want to do. So, which shows us that both determinism and free will are reconcilable, because free will is part of this deterministic process. And this is the way we understand it, both from a philosophical point of view and from a theological point of view. Let me put an argument that will show you guys determinism actually undermines determinism. Let me explain. For example, let's say that Alex decided to make this video and he read all the philosophical books on determinism, and he have decided that this is true. Now, if free will exists, then he can argue that this is true, because with free will, we can change our position. We can decide for ourselves what is true and what's not. So we can decide based on logic and reason what is true. But if free will does not exist, then we can't do that, because everything is determined. So when Alex is studying all these books on philosophy, he is forced to believe something, which means that he can never say that determinism is true. So again, let me rephrase this. If determinism is true, then you cannot argue that determinism is true. So determinism undermines determinism. So that's my argument, and I hope you guys liked the video. And I want to end the video. Thank you guys for watching. And if Alex is watching, again, no disrespect, by the way. I hope that you can see why your argument is flawed. And with that, I want to end the video. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.